Dr. Ghada Karmi is a British Palestinian doctor who was expelled by the Zionist militias from Palestine in 1948, where she initially lived in Jerusalem. Welcome, Ghada. It's good to see you again. Would you like to speak now, please? Just asking Ghada to unmute.
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, hello, and thank you for the invitation to speak at this important gathering on this important day in European history. I really am very much, if I could put it like that, the odd man out here. I do not fit into the grouping of your speakers this evening. I am not Jewish, I am not European, and I do not have a family history of people from people who perished in the European concentration camps. So in that sense, I do not fit into this group. And I want to make the point, which is for me very, very important, that as a Palestinian, as an Arab, as a person from the Middle East, I have nothing to do with events that occurred in Europe during the Second World War, which were perpetrated by Europeans against other Europeans. And as such, that's what I meant by saying I have no place here. However, thinking like that, which I did for many, many years, meaning that it was honestly nothing to do with us as Arabs and Palestinians and so on, disguised for years for me the reality of the situation, which is that very unfairly and very tragically for the Palestinians, they are involved in this episode of European history. They are involved not through their own volition, not through their wish, but through the fact that a decision was made by Europeans to use the homeland of the Palestinian people, my homeland, Palestine, to become the place of repentance for what Europeans had done to Jews in Europe. That is the way I think that one has to regard this, because the Palestinian people, who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this, were made to pay again and again, and from that day to this, for the crimes committed in Europe by Europeans against Europeans. If I tell you that my grandfather, for example, was a man who was, you might call, a landowner, but not in the feudal sense. He had agricultural lands. He and his family worked on those lands. He hired labor peasants to also work on those lands. Now, at that time, which just precedes the Balfour Declaration in 1917, which gave away my country to European Zionists, in the period before that, my grandfather, to give you an idea, was part of an agrarian society. That is what Palestine was. It was largely agrarian, small middle class, small educated class, but mostly really peasants and farmers. So when I look back and I think about my grandfather, my grandfather could no more have understood Zionism or Nazism or European history than flown to the moon. He would be completely out of his depth. It didn't mean anything to him. And that was the reality for most Palestinians. Yet, nevertheless, we were eventually dragged into having to learn about European history, then to learn about the background and origin of the people who usurped our country. And that is the connection. Now, as I grew older and understood that, and the unfairness of that the crimes committed in Europe were quite cynically paid for, made up for, by the use of a country and a people nothing to do with it, who actually, whose lives were ruined thereafter in that act of repentance. Now, when I began to understand that, I saw that the next stage of that imposition was the way that Palestinians were being turned into anti-Semites, an invented accusation against Palestinians that they were in fact anti-Semitic, and a big a drive to somehow make Palestinians guilty of the crimes that had been committed in Europe. Now, I know it sounds crazy, but that's actually what has happened and what is happening. And when you look at the way that censorship is exercised about Palestinians speaking, about Palestinians expressing their own history and their own grievances, you look at the way that European countries, principally Germany, have tried to silence the Palestinian voice. It's part of that. It's part of the attempt to drag in a people absolutely with nothing to do with the German Holocaust into a position in which they can also be blamed. So that is something that I have lived through, and all Palestinians have lived through. And I must tell you that for a while, it was so persuasive, it was so powerful, the invitation to try and draw in Palestinians into a very tragic story, but which has nothing to do with them. The pressure of that led, I must say, some of my fellow Palestinians to begin inquiring into Arab history, Islamic history. Is it true? Are we, i.e. Arabs, Muslims, are we guilty of perhaps being also Jew haters? And maybe there's something in it. An eminent scholar like Edward Said did work very hard at writing about and very much feeling tremendous sympathy for European Jews. And that's a human thing. That's a human thing. And on the human level, I, like all Palestinians, condemn what happened during the Second World War, and I sympathize with every fiber of my being with the victims of what happened. And that is actually the correct position for somebody like me. I want to go on just to explain that the really a tragic result of all this is that Palestinians have become the enemy. The thing is so insane that a piece of history, which happened 80 years ago, and is a really appalling piece of history, has been made to be utterly relevant to people, as I have said over and over again in this war, who have absolutely nothing to do. They've been dragged into this story. And the result is that they are suffering the effects of a new sort of hatred, a hatred of Palestinians who are somehow seen as anti-Semitic and who hate Jews and who refuse to allow the Jews to live in their country because they hate them. So hence you have the twisted narrative about what Hamas is really all about, what any Palestinian form of resistance is all about. That is why you have that. I want to end on 2 points. First, what a moment in history we are living through now. What an irony that the International Court of Justice has begun to investigate the allegation brought by South Africa that Israel is practicing genocide against the Palestinian people. What an irony that the people who justify their ownership of Palestine on the basis of a genocidal war on them are committing a genocidal war on the victims who were made to pay for those crimes. What an irony. And finally, friends, remember, Holocaust is at one level subjective. What the people of Gaza are going through now, for them, is a Holocaust. That is the Holocaust we also need to be marking today. I cannot explain to you adequately how badly I feel about the way that Palestinians have been treated and the tragic situation in Gaza today that I feel as a Palestinian. Not only is it objectively painful, but if you add to that the anger that I and all Palestinians feel that we should have been made to pay over and over again until today for the crimes of people living elsewhere against people living elsewhere. That is the anger that I feel.
Thank you, Ghada. We feel your anger and that illustration of the fact that the Palestinian people are continuously having to pay for the crimes of anti-Semites in Europe is in itself yet another tragedy. Thank you very much for expanding that so very clearly for us this evening.